evening, and on behalf of the Department of Comparative Indian Language and Literature, University of Calcutta, I welcome you all in our 23rd lecture of special lecture series organized by the department. And today we have our very special guest with us, Professor Alberto from Portuguese and Lusophone Studies Department, Goa University, and she will be speaking of Indo-Portuguese literature, and I guess this is something very new area of Indian literature, what is not much spoken of. And I cannot remember that when for the last time in recent past in Calcutta or in West Bengal we have addressed such an area of Indian literature. So this will be very exciting experience, and the area itself is very interesting to us. We will come to know many more things, and such kind of lectures also help us to reimagine the territory of Indian literature, to remap the territory of Indian literature. So from that perspective, this lecture is quite significant, and it will definitely enrich us. So I welcome you all, and I would like to request our student Shaunak Sengupta to formally introduce our speaker, our today's speaker, Professor Alberto. Shaunak.
Thank you, sir. A very warm welcome to our guest speaker, all the professors, research scholars, seniors, and friends who are attending this lecture of the special lecture series hosted by the Department of SIL. Today we have with us Professor Lorraine Ethel Barreto Alberto, who is the assistant professor in the Department of Portuguese and Lusophone Studies in one of the highly esteemed universities of our country, Goa University. Her area of expertise is language and linguistics, mainly in the field of Indo-Portuguese literature and culture. She presented her paper on the contribution of the island of Diva towards the history of Goan literature in a seminar on revisiting higher education, culture studies, English language and literature teaching, hosted by the CES College of Arts and Commerce in Kankolim, Goa. Today she'll be talking about the thematic study of history in the context of Indo-Portuguese literature.
Thank you. Thank you. So can I begin now?
Yeah, sure, Professor Alberto. Sure.
Okay, I'll just turn off my
Yeah.
monitor. Yeah, is this visible to you all?
Yeah, it is visible. It is visible.
Yeah, can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And now we will begin our journey of Indo-Portuguese literature. Okay, literature that was written in Goa by, you will see, different types of people. Okay, and it is basically literature that is Indian literature written in the Portuguese language. How would we define Indo-Portuguese in the first place? Well, in his PhD thesis entitled The East and West in Goan Literature, Father Eufemian Miranda broadly defines Indo-Portuguese as something or someone that exhibits in itself a combination of both of the elements, India and Portugal. In the context of literature, the term Indo-Portuguese literature encompasses work produced in Portugal by immigrant Oriental writers, works made by Portuguese writers living in the East, and works produced in the East under the Portuguese sponsorship. Now, we encounter work of writers like João de Barros. I don't know if you've heard of him. He writes kind of travel literature, who without traveling to India and Goa wrote travel literature. And we then have Portuguese writers like Tomás Ribeiro, Cristóvão Aires, and Fernando Leal, who, having lived in India, assimilated the mysterious reality of ancient India and was so fascinated by it that they refigured this reality and creatively expressed it in literature. Now we find yet another type of, another section of these kind of people. Ethel Pope in India and Portuguese literature describes a third category of writers. Now these writers, ethnically Indian from Goa, having imbibed the Western culture, were influenced by Eastern thought and atmosphere. Now, in order to explain all this to you, I will have to go a little bit into the historical aspect responsible for this phenomenon. Goa was under the Portuguese colonial yoke for 451 years, from 1510 to 1961. And the conversion of the natives was an important part of their colonizing policy. In fact, the principal focus of their mission, besides being economic and political, unlike their other European counterparts, was Christ-centric, which in Portuguese we say Cristo-centrico, okay, which was to convert the people to Christianity. Now, in order to make allies, this whole mission, this whole policy of theirs was more to make allies to whom they could pass on by descent or assimilation their values of culture by miscegenation. For them, the formation of a Christian state would have been a bulwark in order to maintain their interests in the East. We can attribute this never before heard of phenomenon to the fact that when the Portuguese arrived in India and subsequently Goa, it was not about conquering uncultivated regions or virgin forests, dispossessing some poor wild tribes they met with, or were faced with in fact a very complete civilization, one with a high level of religious morale, which was different from theirs, inferior in many ways or in many aspects, but definitely superior in quite a few. And therefore, the attitude of the Portuguese individual towards the Indian, we cannot deny, was one of the most dignified that can be found in the history of colonization. Now, this civilization, one of the oldest in the world, that is our Indian civilization, though there weren't schools like we see today, there definitely were small centers of learning where the Brahmins, well versed in the knowledge of the religious books of Hinduism, taught the youth the Vedas and the Puranas. Now, as far as higher education was concerned, it was known that although there was, in Goa, we did not have like high centers of high cultural studies like you have in the University of Takshila. But there definitely were Shastris, learned men who were devoted to this in-depth study, not only of religion, but of the sciences, and in particular medicine, which made remarkable progress in India. Now the Portuguese, well, they arrived in Goa and they wanted to stay, since they were in urgent need of a stable base of support for their trade monopoly in the East. And it was the need for this stability that prevented them from reducing the native to a semi-slavery kind of a status, okay? So what they did was, the Portuguese sought to bring the native to himself, to make him his equal through religion, through culture, and through social organization. So that's where you see that, okay, this is their first mission, like, bring them closer to them. And that is what the policy was, to basically get them married to the local population, which initially was, women of the lower caste, because the people of the higher caste were very conscious of these things. And, they kind of did not let their daughters marry the Portuguese, okay? It wasn't because also, that being said, it was like the Portuguese that came down, the kind of people that came down, of course, besides the religious priests, a lot of priests, the statesmen, the soldiers, they were people who held pretty much the lower profession kind of things, like the basic professions. So obviously, like the higher class of Goan people would not have given their daughters in marriage to these people. Nonetheless, the policy was of mixed marriages. Okay, the Portuguese presence brought to some extent a relief from the caste separation. To some extent, not really, but to some extent. They also brought about an abolition of the practice of sati and other cruel ceremonies which were practiced at the time. One good thing that they did, in fact, it was a very good thing that they did, was the establishment of this place, this kind of a home, it was like a welfare home. It was called Misericordia de Goa, where this was established in the 16th century to help widows, orphans, the poor, the old, the sick, not only Portuguese and Christians, but also natives, all those who weren't converted, and people of mixed descent, individuals not only of other races, but also of other faiths. Another very significant thing, which I thought I needed to share this with you all, another very significant thing that happened was the fact that when the Portuguese came, now they burnt all the vernacular books. Vernacular, when I say that, you understand, I mean, it was the books written in the native language, okay? As these were considered for them works of pagans. So with that, the unique configuration of the alphabet, specimen of primitive speech, genuine literary language, historical documents, well, all this was lost. In fact, the very name of the language which we speak here in Goa, today we call it Konkani. But like, from where did that name come? What was it called? Konkona? That was lost. So basically, it was a mystery, that was the mystery that surrounded the name of the language. Another interesting fact that I'd like to share with you is that according to fragments of an ancient manuscript discovered and published by renowned Goan Orientalist and historian Jerson de Cunha, which has this title, Sanyadri Kanda, the legend that Goa's Brahmins descended from 96 families of Brahmins from Trihut, now Tirhut in Bengal, has been confirmed. In fact, initially it was a legend, but later it has now been confirmed to be a fact. Okay. Anyway, Sebastião Delgado in 1893 concluded that Konkani was of Aryan descent and an inflexive language, and not Dravidian and unifying, and is very close to Balla Bhasha. Now, I could go on and on about language, but that's not what we are talking about. So I'm trying to move directly to the literary culture of Goa, okay? The history of the literary culture of Goa could broadly be divided into 3 phases, while the first encompassed the whole period from the creation of the parish schools in 1545 to the beginning of the periodical press with the publication of Gazeta de Goa, or the Goa Gazette, the first newspaper on the 22nd of December, 1821. The second phase covered the literary activity, which would extend unto the creation of the Literary Association Instituto Vasco da Gama on 22nd November 1871. Well, this was a literary institute. And finally, the third, which extends from 1871 right up to Goa's liberation in 1961. These are the way it's broadly classified. Now, as I said initially, the policy was conversion, the spread of the Christian religion. Public education was an ecclesiastical monopoly. As one writer, Barreto Miranda, says in his book Quadro Históricos de Goa, he tells us that this can better be understood if we bear in mind that the conquest of the sword was closely aligned to the conquest of the cross. which together with the propagation of the new religion also propagated the elements of moral education. Now, education in Goa. In 1545, on the behest of the king, the then Viceroy Don Juan de Castro ordered that schools be opened. Now, we've got to understand the aim of opening these schools, with the aim of indoctrinating the children in the basics, the fundamentals of the Christian faith, and to teach them at the same time to read, write, and count in Portuguese, besides religious songs and playing musical instruments. These were the first establishments of primary education in Goa. While secondary education was given in the colleges of religious orders, some of which were centers for the irradiation of a more humanistic culture. Now, along with Portuguese, the students were also taught Latin, okay? And this was studied in a span of about 5 or 6 years. And after this study, the young lad had to enroll as a student of philosophy and theology. Now, we all know that study of philosophy and theology would ultimately result in him joining the holy orders. Courses which were given in almost all of the colleges of the religious orders. The first to be instituted was the Seminary of the Holy See of the secular clergy, where boys, we could actually see boys from all over the Orient, namely from Kannada, from the Deccan, the Malabar, Sri Lanka, Burma, places as far as Malaya, China, Japan, and Abyssinia, who joined this seminary and were taught the alphabet, besides learning the good customs. A few months later, when the most revered representative of the Society of Jesus, that is the Jesuits, Saint Francis Xavier, entered Goa, he was highly impressed to see that the number of students who were enrolled were, when I speak of students, native students enrolled, were as high as 60, in fact, over 60. And he spoke about this to his superior. And he even mentioned that the students were now well prepared, they could read, many could write, and were able to proceed now to the higher studies of philosophy and theology. We also know that along with the Jesuits came all the other orders. Okay, we had the Franciscans, the Augustinians, the Dominicans, and various other religious and secular orders that set up institutions in Goa. But the subjects were more or less the same. It was, besides learning Portuguese, Latin, philosophy, theology, they learned songs, hymns and playing a musical instrument. Besides, also catechism, okay, like the kind of the Christian doctrine. They also assisted in the Holy Mass and were taught to sing the Psalms. So all of this being the dominant thought would have only ended up that this student had to aspire to join the seminary. Now, as we know, in 1556, the first printing press of the East was set up at the Jesuit College of St. Paul. And therefore, the earliest texts that were printed were none other than philosophical texts, okay? The ones that had, that actually preached the catechism of the Christian doctrine. And these were written by Saint Francis Xavier, the very first texts. Later, we had Christa Purana, which is the story of Christ, which was written by Father Thomas Stephen. After hearing all of this, I'm sure you would have gathered that it was therefore natural that the first work produced by a Christian, Goan, with this, given the nature of this Luso-Christian and Hindu elements that have already shaped his personality, should have been an expression of the intimate cultural conflict that he faced. So basically, okay, he is Hindu, he's converted to Catholicism, okay, and he's being given this kind of a, I don't know, I call it a brainwash, but a kind of this kind of a Christian indoctrination. So automatically he's going to go through a lot of conflict within himself. In the 17th and the 18th centuries, the church was the most cultured social force of the time and was the only capable catalyst able to accelerate this Luso-Indian symbiosis. We know why. Because see, the ones who actually would have gone to school at that time, as early as the 16th century, would have been boys. And the boys obviously would have had to join the seminary later. So it was the clergy. Okay. And this section of the population comprised of who? Comprised of the native indigenous priests. And these priests, they came from the highest caste, I mean the high caste, the Brahmin caste. Okay, the best prepared intellectually, and almost the only ones who were truly assimilated into the Western culture. While the rest of the population, even after conversion, remained faithful to their Indian way of life. Now, in 1702, the first work that appeared, the first literary work that appeared was of Father António João Freire, which is considered to be the inaugural landmark of Indo-Portuguese or Goan literary production. And this was entitled Aureola dos Índios e Nobiliarquia Brahmana, which if I translated, which I am definitely, it was the halo of the Indian and Brahmin nobility. Okay. Now, this was published in Lisbon. Before his work, there was yet another one, which was called Tratado Apologético contra várias calúnias impostas pela malevolência contra a nação Brahmana. Now, this, obviously, I'm going to translate it, is an apologetic treaty against the slander imposed by a kind of a malevolence or mischief against the Brahmin nation. So, I mean, like, what are they writing about? They have been converted to Christianity, but they're writing about their caste. Okay. This was written by another priest, Father Francisco do Rego, which never ended up being published as the author passed away the same year. Now, both these priests, as we can see, were Brahmins. And their thesis was primarily the superiority of the Brahmin caste over the others. In fact, there's a long, big theory of how the Brahmins came from the mouth of the... we won't get over there, but yeah, there is a lot that you can actually speak about this. So this is from where they got all their, they got their notion. Although as works of creative literature, the value of this work that I've just spoken about would have been zero, okay? But they deserve a special reference in Goa's history, as when assessed from a sociological point of view. These first two works were written by Goans in Portuguese, and was nothing more than an attempt to justify, in the light of Catholic theology, the social phenomena of India, which was namely the caste system, which we see remained an inherent part of the new Indian Christian. However, we see that these were not the only religious who wrote. There were lots of other religious. We have other priests like Father Leonardo Paes, Father Sebastião do Rego. We have priests who belong to the Shardok caste, and they spoke about the superiority of their religion. We have like this priest, Father Sebastião do Rego, whose sermons, started to become literary works, okay? We have Father Jacome Gonçalves, who wrote dictionaries. Okay, he actually went as a missionary to Ceylon, to Sri Lanka, and he wrote dictionaries from Portuguese to Tamil and Tamil to Portuguese. So they have actually contributed, we see, in a very large way. And this helps us come to the conclusion that Western education had definitely inculcated in the Indian Goan Catholic the Christian values, which was importantly egalitarianism. But on the other hand, the son of the Indian soil as he was, could not be uprooted from the land of which his ancestral customs, beliefs, and social structures were an integral part of. And these were what Christianity was not able to abolish. In the Goan Catholic, this egalitarian Catholic spirit and the consciousness of belonging to Mother India coexisted. The first superimposing the second. Okay, we can thus say that ambiguity and ambivalence were the fundamental characteristics displayed in the writings of the Portuguese language. If the 16th and the 17th century and a major part of the 18th century were characterized by a kind of a cultural stagnation, the fact is that already in the 17th and 18th centuries, a sector of the population of Goa, albeit very small, was very fluent by now with the Portuguese language, to the point of being able to write correctly and with style on subjects of social order, history, and religion. Now, with the emergence of the first newspaper, Gazeta de Goa, in 1821, we see subsequent publications were in the form of almanacs. Okay, what were these almanacs? They were like literary repositories, Goan literary repositories, which were printed annually. And they composed of biographies of notable men of the country, tiny articles which dealt with Goa's rich folklore, records of legends, traditions related to historical facts, or even chronicles. Okay. Besides this, there were various other literary periodicals. Now, as Menezes Braganza has put this very aptly, the Hindus of Goa during all of this time were culturally marginalized. Although the constitutional charter, which came out in 1820, said that the Hindu was also a citizen like the Catholic, the Hindu was in fact overlooked. It was like that. Because your conversion to Catholicism came with a lot of benefits. So those who did not convert automatically were left out of this. Okay. They are Marathi, but this did not prevent them from having their education. Their Marathi schools, pathshalas, were centers of instruction and transmission of local and ancestral culture of a socio-religious nature. However, we see that, in the 19th century, it was the presence of two eminent personalities. One was Joaquim Heliodoro Cunha Rivara, and the other was Tomás Ribeiro, who came to India as government secretaries in 1855 and 1871, respectively, and contributed immensely towards the history and literature of Goa in the 19th century, which was one of the reasons, which was in fact the main reason for this great impulse in the literary progress of Portuguese India. And this stimulated many vocations. And without their moral support, I think Goa would perhaps have remained in obscurity. Because just to mention in a sentence, Joaquim Heliodoro Cunha Rivara actually kind of brought back the fact that, he actually started in schools. He said that if a child does not learn his or her mother tongue, that is Konkani, you are not going to be able to teach them anything more than that. And he actually revived Konkani in a big way. And we have Tomás Ribeiro. Now, as I said earlier, they were both secretaries of state, but besides all the work that they did, he was a poet. Tomás Ribeiro was a poet. And the Goan youth, the Goan of that time, were impressed with him and his work. And that's how, they all wanted to kind of imitate him. And that's why I say in brief that it was these two, very briefly, that these two great gentlemen were mainly the cause for stimulating many vocations, in Goa. It was therefore this experiential need to express himself by the written word which led the Indo-Portuguese writer to gain, to a great extent, excellence in the Portuguese language. In order to affirm his originality, he tried to reveal to the world in which he was born his emotions, his aesthetic experience within his cultural tradition and with its own values and meanings. So we can clearly say that the Goan Portuguese writer or the Indo-Portuguese writer did not look outside of his area. He did not look far away or, blindly follow literary periods that were actually prevalent in the West at that time. Because Goa, we see that when the, like, if we talk romanticism came to Goa much later than when it actually began in Europe. So this did not matter. Basically, what was he looking at? He was looking around himself, at things around himself, which he would have expressed in his work. Now, to give you a kind of a relationship between the Indo-Portuguese writer and the Indian culture, the ancestors of the Christian Indo-Portuguese writer had, in the act of embracing the Catholic religion, renounced their ancestral Hindu religion. However, the array of Indian culture could not be erased from his subconscious. Some fundamental assumptions of Indian ethico-social philosophy were part of his ethos, as were the truths and principles of Christian faith and morality. So he kind of did a blend of the two. He therefore carried within himself a huge portion of this cultural longing of the past customs and spirit of his land. Though initially he was torn between the Indian and European demands, he felt that there was nothing conflicting between being able to pay homage, which on his part as a Christian was due to religion or the Catholic faith, and that telluric appeal and attraction to those symbolic figures and philosophical doctrines of ancient India, of all that, they exerted on him, the son of the soil. It was in this resurgence of the Oriental ideal in the last quarter of the 19th century that Indo-Portuguese writers sought to tie the broken thread of the traditions of their birth. Influenced by European philologists like Max Muller, Sir William Jones, and others who were striving to make known in Europe the richness of a 4 times millenary Indian culture which was alive to the day. While in the mind of a European, there was a kind of a sense of mystery and admiration for this India, the Indo-Portuguese writer found a vast field for himself to express in the Portuguese language, realizing that he had the wealth of this heritage that was his own. And here lay the uniqueness of his Portuguese literary contribution. Goan writers who wrote in Portuguese were unable to resist being part of the collective Indian mental disposition. And they saw, because they saw in the Indian culture a tradition of human values, which was expressed in a continuous openness to the absolute and a craving for it. Goa's literary production also contained these waves of the absolute. In fact, Indo-Portuguese literary history has many expressions of such signs. In fact, we see longings for Ishvara or hymns to Prithvi, aspirations of transmigration to an ethereal life, excellence, admiration for these providential figures radiated in legends that are the strength of the Indian race. Strangely, in this field, almost all literary productions in Portuguese are by Christian writers. Okay, we have poets like Paulino Dias, Nascimento Mendonça, Teresa de Piedade de Batista Almeida. The reason I'm actually saying these names, and you will say, why are you actually telling us? Yeah, the reason I'm telling you these names is because these people not only touched upon the Indian themes in a big way, but they even went on to the extent of adopting Hindu pseudonyms. Okay, so Paulino Dias took the pseudonym of Preeti Das, Nascimento Mendonça Nithpal, and Teresa de Piedade de Batista Almeida was called Vimala Devi. I don't know if you've heard of her. In his poem A Morta, in his poem A Morta, Nascimento Mendonça has constructed it around the myth of the love and fidelity between Sita and her husband Rama. It is a kind of a description of Rama's soul, which struggles with remorse, when he banishes his wife. Another poet, Mariano Gracias, his poem, Metempsychos, speaks of the Hindu doctrine of moksha, the transmigration of the soul. His dramatic novel, The Gods of Benares, speak of a young man who, after living a violent lifestyle in the city, feels as if he lacks something bigger, and then he goes in search of a rishi. This enlightened spirit of his sets out in search of a rishi who he believes will help him, will teach him how to believe, and help him reveal the truth. And they actually make their journey to the to Benares, to the Ganges. So this is what we see in these stories. Okay, now I will stop on this particular slide because I'm going to touch on the 5 principal themes. Now, what were the key themes that we see in Indo-Portuguese literature? Indo-Portuguese literature, I'll have to, okay. Indo-Portuguese literature, albeit not vast, has in its repository some significant works in which there are certain themes that spring to mind. It's not like, you see only one aspect in one work. In fact, you'll see a combination of the different aspects in the work, okay, which characterize a particular work. Sometimes a certain motif appears in different works as a variation of this basic theme that we talk about. Now, there were 5 predominant themes. In his novel, Os Brahmanes, Francisco Luís Gomes speaks of the conflict between Brahmanism and liberalism. Now, surprisingly, his novel is not set in Goa. The backdrop of his novel is it's set in India. This was basically the first work of creative Indo-Portuguese literature, which appeared in 1866 and had as its main objective not really to expose the ills of the prevalent caste system in India, but it was more of a conscientious study of the particular caste. Okay, it reflects mainly on how the Goan, Christianized by the Portuguese, is an Indian who looks at the transformation that the cross has brought about in their social environment, marked by stark inequalities. While on one hand, the freedom which was granted by the constitutional charter came to meet the aspirations of that time, in the mind of the Indo-Portuguese writer, there must surely have been this conflict, between the liberalism taught by the gospel and the constitutional charter, which were 2 opposing forces to the ideas of freedom. And this conflict is beautifully portrayed in the novel Os Brahmanes. You find 2 types of Brahmanism. In fact, that's what I usually tell my students, the 2 types of Brahmanism. There is this Brahmanism of caste and Brahmanism of race. That's how he has actually set the novel, the skin color, how it makes a difference in India. The same thing would not have been if you were out of India. Okay, the second one we see, the second theme, prevalent theme, is the world of the Bhatkaras and the Munkars. And this is beautifully depicted in the book O Signo da Ira, which when translated reads The Sign of Wrath. The author of this novel, Orlando da Costa, depicts Goan society of being constituted of 2 classes. Now, one, mainly the landowners, which we call as the Bhatkaras, which you would have known them as to be the Zamindars, and the other of the rural workers who live at the service of the farmer. Those would be, in Goa, we call them Munkars. Now, this feudal world, with its typical social relations, had to find an echo in the literature produced, particularly by authors with social concerns, who touched upon social concerns. Such social concerns are also outlined in an excellent way in some poems and other short stories. Goan society comprised of a class of landowners and also of rural laborers. Usually the latter lived to serve the former. This small middle class basically did not even comprise of more than 10%, which was just around 10%. This social reality lent itself to fiction. This was the reality of our time, of that time. We have different authors like Vimala Devi, Lakshman Rao Sardesai, and R.V. Pandit, who have portrayed in their short stories and poems this theme in a very typical and in a very characteristic manner. This work of high aesthetic value of Orlando Costa, O Signo da Ira, is a masterpiece in neo-realism, which earned its author Ricardo Malheiros Prize in Portugal. The next theme, very predominant, was the theme of Mother India or Bharat Mata, its fascination and mystery. In India, as we know, philosophy, religion, and mythology are intertwined and form a living tradition. They are still very much a part of the life and society where they were born and where they blossomed. And it is in them that the mystery and fascination of India resides, from where our literature contains a good number of tales and poems that reflect the philosophical doctrines or hymns of praise. Okay, they literally, in homage, there were like plenty. There was Vatsala and different ones which were in homage to the mythological gods and their ceremonies. Portraits of great Indian personalities in the who were very prominent in the history of India, together with motifs and reflections of the mysterious Indian soul. Another very predominant, or the fourth aspect or the fourth topic, was the one of the Bailadera, or the temple dancer, which in Goa we say Kalvant. Okay, in Indian society, particularly the Goan, there existed a woman who was a sign of contradiction, the Hindu temple dancer, also called the Kalvant. Over time, the Devadasi, or servant of God, became a woman who sold herself. Historians and sociologists use varied approaches to study this institution. The Nach girls, or Devadasis, underwent a metamorphosis in the romantic imagination of the Indo-Portuguese poet to become a symbol of beauty and feminine grace. The theme of the Kalvant exercised a strange fascination on the poets of Goa. And then finally, we have the last predominant theme, which was the land and its flock. Now, as we see, Goan society is portrayed mainly in two works of fiction. Okay, in fact, the Goan society there's a caricature kind of made of Goan society. The Christian middle class of the late 19th and early 20th century, with its idiosyncrasies and hidden intimate weaknesses, appeared in the novelette Jacobitus of Gip, which was the pen name of Francisco João da Costa. And so this gave us a sneak peek, or a kind of an insight into the Christian middle class families. Now, on the other hand, we have Agustin Fernandes, whose novel entitled Borki, where one finds more or less an integral picture of the rural Hindu society, which was not very common. And it was not a topic that was commonly touched. And in this novel, he has depicted so beautifully the superstitions, beliefs, the religious prejudices and assumptions, habits and customs of that time. Okay. Now, the Indo-Portuguese writers who settled in the West, whether Christian or not, although familiar with Portuguese and French literature, found the principles of the Indian literary aesthetics based on the concept of rasa, according to which what is well done and perfect is undoubtedly the most enjoyable thing to be very favorable. Okay. However, in Goa, since there really did not exist any tradition of literary aesthetics, and the writers were not exposed to Western literary theories, this would also be one of the reasons why Indo-Portuguese creative literature, particularly poetry, is all drenched in Indian historical legends, Oriental mythology with accents here and there from the local bucolic life, in which we see in which you will see resides the with the telluric cry deep within their being as their inspirational force. Now we might I just wanted to share with you two other writers who I have here. One of them was Santana Rodrigues. Okay, this gentleman, he was one of the first Goan writers to deconstruct an Oriental discourse. But what was very captivated my attention, and I thought I needed to tell you, was that he was very keen with Rabindranath Tagore. And when Rabindranath Tagore went to Europe, there is in fact a letter which speaks of Santana Rodrigues being in touch with Rabindranath Tagore, and he actually makes this kind of a proposition in his works. Now we have this other writer here, Mascarenhas. The Mascarenhas, along with another writer, Deodato Barreto, the two of them were very nationalist. Okay, there was this in 1928, the Instituto Indiano, like the Indian Institute, was founded in Coimbra, and these two gentlemen, they started a newspaper by the name of India Nova. Now we know that these two, including Santana Rodrigues, were very nationalist in their and in Telo de Mascarenhas even met with Tristão Bragança Cunha, and to kind of promote the nationalist movement. And you can see, because you see his work, one of his works, which was entitled A Mulher Hindu, the Hindu woman, he actually venerates the Indian woman. He speaks about how the Indian woman was so highly venerated during the Vedic and the Brahmanic periods. And, he actually not eulogizes, he venerates women who have created a name for themselves. I mean, the women who've made their names into the annals of history, like in literature, in theater, in judiciary, in all different spheres. Okay, so that is what I wanted to share. But another being said, Telo de Mascarenhas also translated Rabindranath Tagore's work. His work was called Usha the Enigma, where he's translated Rabindranath Tagore's short stories. I mean, they were highly influenced, all of these writers, these last two writers, by Rabindranath Tagore and his work. In conclusion, I would like to say Indo-Portuguese writer is a romantic, a man under the spell of a rupture and a longing for totality. He was ethnically Indian, imbibed traits of a Western, Christian, Latin culture, while on the other, living under a strong subconscious of the Vedic, Upanishadic Hindu substratum. He turned to himself in a dramatic and painful manner, like the Romantics, in his search for self-identity and self-definition. From the perspective of literary aesthetics, Indo-Portuguese literature can be considered as a corpus of works conceived and brought forth in the agony and ecstasy of nostalgia. If some works can be plainly classified as belonging to Romanticism or Neorealism or Social Realism, others, mainly the poetic works, had the influences of Parnassian and Symbolist schools, or are very best interpreted in the light of the Sanskrit theories of Alankara, Riti, and Rasa. Portuguese by expression, and Indian by the aestheticism of the writers, principally of the poets, on account of the themes and motives underlying it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Alberto, for presenting the historical map of Indo-Portuguese literature in such a beautiful way. It was really enriching to us. I believe there will be some questions and opinion, so we can have a discussion for our next couple of minutes. We have with us one of the leading comparatists, Professor Shubha Chakraborty Dasgupta. We have with us Professor Shakti Sadhan Mukhopadhyay, Dr. Rajarshi Mitra. So if you have anything to share or anything to initiate a discussion, you can please go ahead with your opinion or with your questions. And I would like to tell our students also that if you have any questions or anything more to know, you can write your questions in the chat box, and then we can carry it forward for discussion. Or else you can unmute your mic to ask the question also. This is a very new area and we came to know so many things. Professor Alberto, I am interested to know quite a few things, like the history of translation and the literary interaction between Goan Portuguese literature and the Konkani literature. Is there any history of translation, or how these two literatures interact with each other?
History of translation, you say? Come again, sir. I didn't catch exactly what you said.
History of translation between Konkani and Goan Portuguese. If you can put some light on this, and how does these two languages actually interact with each other in cultural sphere in Goa?
See what happens, like, you know, in Goa. In fact, I have my colleague here, Franz Schubert Kota, also, who is into translations.
Oh,
so
nice.
the thing is that, it is for our most of our documents, historical documents in the archives, are all in Portuguese. Okay, so I mean, like, yeah, so we have to have people in this field. I think I'm that's what I've gathered from what you're trying to say. So we have people specialized in this field to actually read these documents and translate them. At the moment, we are also on a project. We are on a project, the two of us, and we are translating 16th century, 17th century documents from the archives. You know, very, very old. So it's basically paleography. You've got to figure out the script, because, you know, the old archaic script, the way they wrote, and at the same time the language, because that's very old language which was written then. So yeah, we are doing a double a job like that. Yeah.
Okay. And
also, sir, can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
In the Konkani vocabulary, okay, Goan Konkani vocabulary, we have like a lot of words which come from Portuguese, which are derived from Portuguese. In fact, about 1,400 words. You know, like a simple thing like table. Table in Konkani is called mez, but in Portuguese is called mesa. Okay, then we have like a chair. Chair is called cadel, and in Portuguese it's called cadeira. So, you know, things, plenty of words. Even a church. A church is called igrejas in Portuguese. In Konkani, in Portuguese it's called igreja. So yeah, I think someone asked me this question of bailadeira. Bailadeira was a term coined in Portuguese, which you, as you rightly said, bailadeira is in French. Yes, the same one. Okay, that is the term which was coined in Portuguese. You know, I tried to be precise. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. The thing is that I tried to stick to the topic, but I was like, I didn't know where I wanted to tell you so much. In fact, I feel like teaching y'all, because there is so much that you need to know. We have, just to tell you, like how you saw that document that I said with Jason the Cunha laid to rest, that kind of, it was perceived to be a legend initially, but later it's now like a known fact that basically there were 96 families that came from Bengal, Brahmin families that came and settled in the
Okay.
south of Goa. Yeah, and then they moved out. Okay, so that's the Shenoys, Shenai, Shendis, where we get them from now. Yeah, they
Okay.
settled all over Goa. Yeah.
Okay. Professor Shakti Sadhan Mukhopadhyay actually missed some part of your talk, but he congratulates you. We have a question by Priyankar De. Ma'am, please, would you like to enlighten Goan identity and the language based from the point of colonization? Priyankar De.
Identity. When you see identity,
Ma'am, please, would you like to enlighten Goan identity and the language based from the point of colonization?
Goan identity. Would you enlighten on Goan identity? See, our Goan identity basically, as you've seen, we like, if you want to know something that is truly Goan, is that what you are asking me? Something that makes us truly Goan? Yeah.
Yeah, I think he wants to know Indo-Portuguese literature and how Goan identity is reflected in those literary texts. I think
See, the
Priyanka De
literary
wants
text,
to know that. Yeah.
it is based, yeah, it is based on the 5 themes that I told you. Goan identity reflects in every work of the writers. Okay, now, as I had shown you slides of, I thought that it might be of interest to you, like work wherein you see a Mulyerindu, or things that you might have been into, but actually we have these, most of the works that we have are Goan identity. In fact, I'm actually now supposed to present a paper on one of these topics. I'll just give you a simple topic. Okay, this was the name of this story by Vimala Devi was called Speranza, and Speranza in English is, when translated, means hope. And this particular story, short story, it reflects so beautifully. She actually brings to the fore, number one, the caste discrimination. Yeah, the patriarchal society, the patriarchy that existed in society then, now continues to exist. Yeah, we moved on to the 21st century, but yeah, it continues to exist. And she shows how this thing of Badkar Munkar, this thing was something very, very prevalent. In fact, it still exists today. This the landowners and the tillers of the soil. Okay, the difference was so marked. You have no idea. The Munkar had to be far away, like really far away. He could not come into the area where the landowner would sit. So over here, she tells you the simple story of this boy who actually is educated, being a boy in his family, but he comes from that Munkar class. Okay, he's educated, and then what happens? Now he's looking out for a job. So he thinks that if he asks his Batkan is the landlady, like, can you get me a job? Like, can you help me get a job? Like, can you put in a word for me to get me a government job or whatever? He realizes you only go to see that the landlady says, oh, just because you are educated today, you want a job? Like, what are you talking? So you see that, that thing never disappeared. So this kind of Goan identity exists in most of the works of literature. Okay, you'll see it in all of those works, especially the novels. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is by Lere, and Lere wants to know, I would like to ask how relevant, if at all, is Indo-Portuguese literature in relation to today's Konkani literature?
In relation to today's Konkani literature, in fact, I'm so sorry because I can't talk much about Konkani literature. You had a talk with Damodar Mauzo, right? I mean, probably he has, but I'm sure, I'm definitely sure that there is a kind of a connect between the two. Okay, because I'm sure that Konkani literature too has tapped on so many of these kind of topics. I mean, themes which were prevalent before, prevalent now. Now we have something as simple as in Goa we have this tradition of the teatru natak, as you would have called it. Teatru. It is a Konkani form of. It is the medium is Konkani. It is basically to entertain the people in Goa on social, political, the prevalent themes that happen in society that are relevant themes of today. Like, we probably criticize some politician or some member of the clergy, or maybe somebody in like a cop or something like that. So I think that this is also what many writers, when they wrote teatro in Portuguese, they took up themes like this, prevalent themes that were. So I have a feeling that there is definitely a big, huge connect between the Konkani thematic history and the Portuguese, definitely. Yeah, because we have many of the. I can really talk. Okay, I'm really sorry. I can just go on and on. We have many of the writers who used to write in Konkani and Marathi, like R.V. Pandit. Then we have Lakshman Rao Sardesai. We have Anand Rao Sardesai, who, because I told you, see, the Hindus of Goa, if you weren't converted, you were actually marginalized. So these people learned the language, and later on in the 20th century, they began to write in Portuguese. And what did they do? Some of them, just like R.V. Pandit, just translated his Konkani poems into Portuguese. So imagine, literally, to do this literary translation of poems is a big thing. But he did that. Whereas these other writers like Lakshman Rao Sardesai, they wrote in the Portuguese language, and they wrote beautifully, similar topics, similar themes. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is by Aratrika, and her question is: even the Siddhis of Goa came as slaves with the Portuguese people. Ma'am, is there an influence of Siddhi culture on Indo-Portuguese literature and vice versa?
Who Siddhis? When you say Siddhis come from?
Siddhi, I think Siddhis are originally from Africa, I guess.
Yes.
But her point is Siddhis came to Goa as slaves with the Portuguese people.
Yes. Yes.
And is there any influence of Siddhi culture into Indo-Portuguese literature?
No, sadly, no. I don't think so. No.
There is not much representation of that.
Yeah, there is no much. There is literally no representation. You just hear in some of the works where they talk about what different other ethnicities were present, because obviously when they came on their voyages, they brought with them a lot of slaves. So all these slaves, they assimilated with the local population and stuff. Probably continued as slaves in different households, but in influence particularly, I haven't yet come across. I'm really young in this field, and I promise maybe someday, sometime, if I stumble upon something, I will definitely let you know. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is by Professor Ajay Prasad. He is professor of Portuguese language from Jamia Millia Islamia. And
Yes.
Ajay, Dr. Prasad wants to know, Lauren, are these works easily available and read by common Goans, or stays only in academic circles?
See, sadly, I keep saying that there is so much out there for so many people to read, because today we have a big group of Brazilians who come down to Goa. They form, and I'm part of this group. It's called Pensando Goa, as in it's called Thinking Goa. So they have come down over the years, and they have taken a lot of our work, and they've translated it. We have a gentleman by the name of Paul Melo E. Castro, who's in the University of Leeds, and he's translated a lot of these works into English. So yes, you would definitely find them in many libraries, okay, as works in English, also in Portuguese. But that being said, I don't think a number of, there is a sizable Goan population who even knows and even reads anything that is of this genre, Goan Portuguese or say Indo-Portuguese literature. Yeah, very sad. That's what they keep saying, that it's very sad that most of our people don't even know the rich Goan culture, the tradition. This tradition of writing, literary writing that we have for us. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is by Mr. Shubhadeep Kumar, and Shubhadeep wants to know, I'm interested to know about the readership of Indo-Portuguese literature historically within Goa and in the larger Lusophone world. So within Goa, I think it
Shubhadeep,
is
I think,
answered.
it was, yeah, the
And the
similar
Lusophone
one.
world.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, to continue with that answer, basically, you find more readers out of Goa, like a huge number of people who read Goan literature outside of Goa, who have written so many papers on Goan literature, and they are from Brazil, from Portugal. It's sad. Yeah. Historically, within Goa, zero, not much. Unless you are in the Goa, in the Portuguese department of the Goa University. Yes, that's when you will have to read it. Yeah.
Professor Shakti Sadhan Mukhopadhyay adds something. He adds, there are many words we use in Bengali originally taken from Portuguese
Yes.
language, and
Yes.
J.J. Campbell has written in his book Portuguese in Bengal.
Yes, there are. Yes, there are a lot of words. Yes, that's why I said it's a Balabasha. Balabasha comes from Bengali. Is Balabasha
Bhalobasha, I mean love. You mean love or
the
something
language?
else?
Balabasha. They say that
Yeah, yeah.
Konkani has a lot of. Yeah, that's what I said initially. Balabasha
Hmm.
is from where we derive a lot of our Konkani vocabulary comes from there. In fact, the root is from Sanskrit. So there are more words in Konkani that have this similar, kind of a root more than the words in Marathi. The words, Konkani words come from Balabasha.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
What
okay.
is Balabasha? Balabasha is do you all
Well,
speak it? Is it like an old archaic language?
I don't know. Perhaps Professor Shakti Sadhan Mukhopadhyay. Sir, can you hear me? If you know about it, and if you can add, because I really do not get it. Shubhadeep, do you get it? Because Shubhadeep knows very good about the history of language. Oh, Brojo
Maybe
Bhasha.
it's
It's
Brajbasha.
Braj Bhasha.
I
Okay,
don't
okay,
know,
okay.
but the way it's written on the books in Portuguese,
Right, right,
So
right, right,
yeah,
right.
so I'm not, yeah.
Okay, okay. Braj Bhasha, Braj Bhasha, Braj
Okay.
Bhasha. It is actually a literary language. It is
Okay.
actually a literary language, and in medieval era, so many poems have been written, especially the Vaishnava Padavali and other things.
Okay.
Dr. Rajarshi Mitra added. Sorry, I couldn't get it. Braj Bhasha,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
Professor Mukhopadhyay adds, H.L.V. Dirozio is a celebrated Luso-Indian poet in Bengal. H.L.V. Dirozio is a celebrated Luso-Indian poet in Bengal.
Okay. Okay.
Huh, Dirozio.
Luso
And
Indian poet in Bengal, huh?
yeah,
Derozio. Derozio
yeah.
from, what is he, where is he originally from? HLV Derozio.
Dirozio originally from
Luso would have been from speaking the language of the Lusophone language. That would have been Portuguese. So Derozio, where is he from? Or he was born in India. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Someone else has said, I have a second question that we can build up the multicultural context of the language, be considered from the viewpoint of reader response theory in both Asian and European consciousness. Yeah, this was okay, the Rosario. Yes. Yes. The Rosario is, yeah, it would have been,
Acha.
definitely should have been a Luso-Indian poet. This particular one, my
which question, ma'am? Priyanka Priyankar Dev.
Priyankar Dev.
Yeah, yeah. Priyankar Dev's question is, should I read it? I have
Yeah.
a second question, that how can we build up the multicultural context of the language be considered from the viewpoint of reader response theory in both Asian and European consciousness? Uh, I am not getting the questions perfectly, I guess. Uh, I'm
No,
the,
all I can say is that, see, basically, I think that, when you look at the works of these writers today, like Vimala Devi's work has been translated into so many different languages. And every time I see a kind of like, you have literary critics who actually give their literary criticism on the work. You see that people say that over spanning so many countries, whether it is in the Catalan language, or anywhere, whether it's in Spain, it's in other parts of Europe, even in German, the work has been translated. People say that it actually strikes a chord with them. The themes, the Goan themes, does strike a chord with people from anywhere. It's that relevant. Like, you can almost identify with them. Okay, I don't know whether that is what you wanted to hear, but yeah, I think these themes, you could just relate, anyone could just about relate to these themes.
And ma'am, one more thing, what I am interested on of, that is, what is about the contemporary Goan literature? I mean, Indo-Portuguese literature and the
Now,
publishing. Now, and the role of publishing or magazine or literary festivals, if anything is there, to promote Indo-Portuguese literature.
yeah, to promote Indo-Portuguese literature, first of all, in Goa, we have, I wouldn't say like now literally to say that we promote Indo-Portuguese literature, but to promote the Portuguese language and to kind of, encourage more and more Goans to start writing in the Luso language, to write in Portuguese. We have two institutes in Goa. One of them is Instituto Camões, which promotes the culture, and the other one is Fundação Orient, which actually kind of supports the teaching of Portuguese in schools.
Okay.
So we have these organizations, they have different varied activities during the year. Like, one of them is like a singing competition. So you have students from like schools to higher secondaries, colleges, who get together and sing. So that kind of singing is one way of learning languages, you see. So of course they're promoting the language. Another thing is, I don't know if you all have heard of the fado. It's a genre of Portuguese,
Fado,
of
music.
Portuguese, the music, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's another competition that they have. Besides this, they have literary competitions. Like, they have something where short story writing in Portuguese, so they want you to have the backdrop for this, again, would be something very Goan, a Goan theme, and you write in the Portuguese. This is just to encourage students of today to continue to write in the language. Okay, my colleague and I, we try to participate as much as we can, just to keep the thing going, and yeah, just to keep it alive. But otherwise, if you go to see today Indo-Portuguese literature, there is not much happening. In fact, the last book that we had was released about 2 or 3 years ago by this writer called Epitácio Paes. Posthumously, after his death, all his writings, which were spread in newspapers and magazines, were kind of compiled into a book. That being said, yeah, we don't have that many like vocations in that contemporary. If you're talking Goa, outside of Goa, yes, definitely, but not too many. There isn't much happening in that scene. People are not coming up. Now we have this book. The last PhD that we had from the Goa University was in the year 2003. It was this priest, Father Eufemian Miranda, who I quoted him initially, and he's done like an extensive study of all the themes and of all the poems and the poets and all. That was his PhD thesis, which was entitled Orient e Ocidente na Literatura Goesa, which means the East and the West in Goan literature. So that was the last published analysis or something to do, in this 21st century. So after that, I haven't really seen much. Okay.
Okay. And one thing more. You were talking about Tagore and Tagore's translation into Portuguese language, and you also talked about the Sanskrit poetics. So I'm quite interested to know: is there any other Indian author from modern Indian literature who are translated into Portuguese, especially from India? Especially from the Indian translators and the Sanskrit poetics translated into Portuguese?
Sanskrit, I wouldn't know, but Telugu the Mascarenhas, as I mentioned, yes, he has. I actually read Tagore's short stories written in Portuguese because it was translated by him. In fact, as I said earlier, Santana Rodrigues wanted, like, he kind of proposed that he wanted to translate his work, but Telugu the Mascarenhas did it. He went ahead, and you have. I went online and I was just trying to check it out, and it says there Rabindranath Tagore by Telugu the Mascarenhas, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like, have you heard? I'm sure you know these stories, right? The skeleton and stories like that. Basically centered around the woman. That's what we learned. So I mean, I would have read it from in this language. Would never have even dreamt of reading it in English. But yes, we were sent the whole thing in English to read, because I'm in this Pensando Goa, and they are the ones who are researching all this. Yeah. So this priest, Father Euphemian, has kind of, he's done an in-depth study of all the themes and what was it that this conflict that the Goan Portuguese writers had at that time. And he has come out with this Sanskrit Connect, he has given kind of brought about this Sanskrit terminology, saying that Akriti, Rasa and Riti in their way of writing. I haven't done an in-depth thing on this, but yeah, I have read it as a student, his work. Yeah, that's what I'm.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Alberto. I do not think there are any questions.
Yeah.
So if anybody has anything to add, just unmute your mic so we can have 2 more minutes, or else we will go to conclude the session for today. Okay, I do not think there is no question. Okay, so I would like to request our student Shaunak to give formal vote of thanks, and then we will conclude our session.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Loren Alberto, for such an enriching session. Thanks to Shuham Kormokar and Chandra Sarkar for the poster. And lastly, thanks to our HOD, Mrinmoy Pramanik sir, for such a lovely seminar. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you so much, Professor Alberto, for enlightening us with really a new area of literary studies. And hopefully we can have more conversation on this, and we can have more interacting session to be enriched and to promote Indo-Portuguese literature. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Yeah, bye.